The observation deck of Station Omega-7 was packed wall to wall with spectators. Dozens of alien species crowded against the reinforced viewing glass, their various forms of eyes fixed on the containment chamber below. The air hummed with tension and whispered conversations in 100 different languages. Ambassador Kyle Brennan squeezed through the crowd, finding his spot just as the demonstration was about to begin. The human officer beside him, Commander Lisa Hayes, gave him a grim nod. Her arms were crossed tight across her chest, her jaw set in a way that told Kyle she already knew how this was going to end. Down in the containment chamber, a massive creature paced behind energy barriers that crackled with enough power to vaporize a small ship. The Vexthor. Even the name sounded dangerous. It was easily 12 feet long, covered in scales so black they seemed to absorb light itself. 6 powerful legs moved with liquid grace, each step precise and purposeful. But it was the eyes that caught Kyle's attention. They weren't the mindless eyes of a beast. They were calculating, intelligent, always watching. "Here comes number 8, Lisa muttered under her breath. Kyle had missed the first 7 attempts. He'd only arrived on the station 3 days ago, but the stories were already legendary. A Krellian warlord had been the first to try. The Krellians were massive warriors, each one standing over 8 feet tall with natural armor plating and strength that could bend steel. That warlord had lasted maybe 40 seconds before the Vexthor tore through him like paper. The medical team had barely saved his life. Then came a telepathic master from the Yithran collective. Everyone thought surely a being that could read minds would succeed. The attempt lasted even less time. Rumor was the telepathic contact with the Vexthor had driven the poor creature half insane. It was still in medical isolation, muttering about walls of teeth and darkness. The attempts continued. A cyborg warrior with enhanced reflexes. A swarm intelligence that could attack from multiple angles. A phase shifter that could become intangible. One by one they all failed. Some walked away with injuries. Others were carried away on stretchers. Now it was the Krellians' turn again. This time they'd brought their absolute finest. Champion Draknor stood in the chamber entrance, nearly 9 feet of pure muscle and battle scars. His arms were thick as tree trunks. He'd supposedly never lost a fight in his entire life. 300 victories in the arena. 50 combat missions without a scratch. The energy barrier dropped. Draknor charged forward with a battle roar that shook the observation deck. The Vexthor didn't even seem surprised. It simply moved. One moment it was 10 feet away, the next it was inside the Krellian's guard. Kyle barely saw what happened. There was a blur of black scales, a sickening crack, and suddenly the undefeated champion was on his back, gasping for air. The medical team rushed in immediately, energy shields forming around them as they dragged Draknor to safety. The whole thing had taken maybe 30 seconds. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Some species clicked or chittered or hummed their distress. Others simply stared in disbelief. "This is the 8th failure," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're calling it a death sentence in scales. Nobody can control that thing." Kyle didn't respond right away. He was too busy watching the Vexthor. The creature had returned to its pacing, moving along the same path it had traveled before. But there was something about the way it moved. It wasn't random. It wasn't the behavior of a mindless beast lashing out in rage or fear. Every step was deliberate. Every turn calculated. The creature was testing the barriers, analyzing the space, studying every person who entered. It wasn't attacking out of aggression. It was eliminating threats. There was a difference. "Look at how it moves," Kyle said quietly. Lisa glanced at him. "What?" "It's not angry. It's evaluating." Kyle pointed at the creature. "Watch. Every time someone new enters the chamber, it shifts position to maintain maximum tactical advantage. It's not a monster. It's a warrior." Before Lisa could respond, a tall figure approached them. Vorin, the Galactic Council representative, towered over both humans. The Althean species were known for their pride and their belief in genetic superiority. They'd engineered themselves for millennia to be faster, stronger, smarter than baseline biology allowed. "Your species has been quiet during these proceedings, humans," Vorin said, his voice dripping with barely concealed condescension. "Do you have nothing to offer? Or do you recognize when you are outmatched?" Kyle finally tore his eyes away from the Vexthor to look at the alien. Around them, other species had turned to listen. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community. Most species saw them as weak, small, soft, definitely not warriors. "Maybe we're just watching you make the same mistake 8 times, Kyle said calmly. The observation deck went quiet. Several aliens made sounds that Kyle's translator couldn't quite identify. Probably shock at a human speaking so directly to a council member. Voron's expression darkened, his skin shifting to a deeper shade. And what mistake is that? Kyle looked back at the Vex Thor, watching it pace. You're all trying to prove you're stronger than it? Every champion who walked in there was focused on domination. On showing they couldn't be beaten. But that's not what it's looking for. Then what is it looking for? Voron demanded. Kyle was quiet for a long moment, studying the creature. There was something in those ancient eyes. Something he recognized from back home, from the animals his family had worked with on the frontier colonies. Something none of you have tried to offer, he finally said. Respect. 3 days had passed since the 8th failed attempt. 3 days of Kyle requesting, arguing, and finally convincing Station Commander Jake Morrison to grant him unlimited observation access to the containment wing. Most of the crew thought he was crazy. Some thought he had a death wish. A few just figured he was bored and looking for entertainment. Kyle didn't care what they thought. He stood now in the observation corridor, completely alone. The rest of the station gave this area a wide berth. Nobody wanted to be near the thing that had put 8 of the galaxy's finest warriors in medical bay. But Kyle came here every day. Sometimes for hours at a time. The Vex Thor was always there waiting. Always watching. The creature had remarkable eyes. Not just in their appearance, though they were striking enough with that golden gleam against the black scales. It was what lay behind them. Intelligence. Awareness. A kind of ancient wisdom that reminded Kyle of something from home. He'd grown up on Terra Nova, one of the outer frontier colonies where humanity was still carving out a place among the stars. His family ran what other species called a death world animal sanctuary. To humans it was just the family business. They worked with wolves, bears, big cats, even the genetically recreated raptors that science had brought back from extinction. Other alien species were terrified of these creatures. They couldn't understand why humans would want to live alongside predators. Why we'd bring them into our homes, our lives. They saw only teeth and claws and danger. But Kyle had learned something important growing up surrounded by Earth's apex predators. Respect mattered so much more than dominance. His father used to say that you couldn't force a wolf to trust you. You had to earn it. Every single day. You're not just a weapon, are you? Kyle said quietly to the Vex Thor. The creature's ear plates twitched. Just slightly. It was the first real reaction Kyle had gotten in 3 days of standing here talking. He smiled. Progress. The door hissed open behind him. Dr. Amy Carson walked in carrying her data pad, her expression somewhere between curious and exasperated. She was the station's chief xenobiologist, and she'd been running tests on the Vex Thor since it arrived. Still talking to it? She asked, not unkindly. Still listening to it, Kyle corrected. Amy pulled up her scan results, the holographic display casting blue light across her face. Talking to it won't help, Kyle. Look at these neural scans. The creature is highly intelligent, maybe more intelligent than half the species in the council. But every test we've run shows it only responds to strength, dominance, power. Kyle shook his head slowly, never taking his eyes off the Vex Thor. No. It only responds to what it considers strength. And I don't think any of you know what that means. Then enlighten me, Amy said, crossing her arms. Kyle pointed at the creature. Every warrior who walked in there was trying to prove something. They were showing off their power, their speed, their abilities. They went in there thinking, I'm going to make this creature submit to me. But look at it. Really look. Amy stepped closer to the glass. The Vex Thor had stopped pacing and was now sitting perfectly still, its 6 legs folded beneath its massive body. But those eyes never stopped moving, tracking every detail of its environment. It's not looking for a master, Kyle continued. It's looking for a partner. Someone it can trust. And trust isn't built on domination. Amy looked skeptical but said nothing. She'd seen too many failures to get her hopes up. Kyle stayed for another hour after she left, just standing there. Observing. Learning. The Vex Thor never took its eyes off him either. It was like they were sizing each other up, 2 warriors from different worlds trying to understand each other across the divide of species. That night changed everything. Kyle was in the containment wing again, running through his nightly observation routine, when the alarm started screaming. Red lights flooded the corridors. The station's automated voice announced a system test in progress, but something had gone wrong. He heard the explosion before he saw it. An energy conduit in the wall erupted in a shower of sparks and flame. The blast waved through Kyle backwards, slamming him against the corridor wall hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. But he wasn't thinking about himself. Through the smoke and chaos he saw debris falling. Huge chunks of metal and broken conduit, all crashing down toward the containment cell. The force fields were flickering. Failing. If they went down completely and that debris hit the cell's physical barriers, it could rupture the containment. The Vexthor could be hurt. Or killed. Kyle didn't think. He just moved. He threw himself at the emergency control panel, his fingers flying across the interface even as more explosions rocked the corridor. His training kicked in. Reroute power from secondary systems. Reinforce the containment field. Redirect the falling debris. Sharp metal sliced across his arms as he worked. Blood ran down his hands, making the controls slippery. The heat from the fires was intense. Smoke filled his lungs. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Not until the containment field stabilized. Not until the debris had been deflected away from the cell. When it was finally over, Kyle slumped against the wall, breathing hard. His arms were covered in cuts, some deep enough that he'd need medical attention. His uniform was torn and scorched. Everything hurt. But the cell was intact. Through the reinforced glass, now covered in soot and scorch marks, Kyle could see the Vexthor. The creature stood completely motionless in the center of its enclosure. But it wasn't looking around at the damage or checking for threats. It was staring directly at Kyle. Their eyes met across the barrier. Human and alien. Two warriors from different worlds. And in that moment something passed between them. Some understanding that went deeper than words or species. Kyle had chosen to protect rather than flee. He'd risked his own life to save a creature that everyone else saw as a monster. He hadn't done it to prove his strength or dominance. He'd done it because it was the right thing to do. The Vexthor's head tilted slightly. Those golden eyes narrowed, studying the bleeding human with new intensity. Something had shifted. Something fundamental. The wall between them had cracked just a little. And that crack was about to become a doorway. The medical bay on Station Omega-7 had seen a lot of action in the past week, but the doctor still looked surprised when Kyle walked in with his arms wrapped in temporary bandages, blood seeping through. "Let me guess," the doctor said. "The containment wing?" "Yeah," Kyle admitted. Word spread fast on a station. By the time Kyle's wounds were cleaned and sealed, Commander Jake Morrison was waiting outside the medical bay. His face was red, his jaw clenched so tight Kyle could hear his teeth grinding. "My office. Now." The walk there was silent. Other crew members stepped aside as they passed, suddenly very interested in their workstations. Everyone knew Morrison's temper. The office door barely closed before Morrison exploded. "You violated 3 safety protocols, Brennan." His fist slammed down on the desk hard enough to make his coffee mug jump. 3. You entered a restricted zone during an emergency. You operated damaged equipment without authorization. You risked your life for a specimen that has put 8 warriors in medical bay. Kyle stood at attention but kept his voice calm. "I saved the specimen, sir. You nearly got yourself killed." Morrison's face was getting redder. "But I didn't." Kyle met his superior's eyes without flinching. "And now it trusts me. A little." Morrison stopped mid-rant. His anger seemed to deflate into confusion. "Trust? Brennan, are you hearing yourself? It's a predator from a death world. It doesn't trust. It doesn't feel. It kills. That's what it does." "Everything trusts something, Commander," Kyle said quietly. "You just have to speak its language." Morrison stared at him for a long moment. Then he sank into his chair, suddenly looking very tired. "You want to go in there? Into the cell?" It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "That's suicide." "With respect, sir, 8 warriors went in there trying to dominate it. I'm not going to do that." "Then what are you going to do?" Kyle thought about the wolves back home. About the first time his father let him enter an enclosure alone. "I'm going to show it respect." Morrison was quiet for a long time. Finally he shook his head. "I can't authorize this. The council would have my head. Yours too." "I understand, sir." Kyle turned to leave but Morrison's voice stopped him. "But I can't stop you if I don't know about it. And I'm going to be very busy with repairs for the next few hours." Kyle looked back. Morrison was staring at his computer screen, deliberately not meeting Kyle's eyes. "Thank you, sir." The next morning, Kyle stood outside the containment cell. His heart was hammering in his chest, but his hands were steady. Dr. Amy Carson stood at the control panel, her finger hovering over the release button. "This is insane," she said for the 3rd time. "Probably," Kyle agreed. He'd left his sidearm, his equipment, everything in his locker. He wore only his basic uniform. No armor. No weapons. Nothing. If this goes wrong. It won't. You don't know that. Kyle looked through the glass at the Vex Thor. The creature was already standing, watching him. Waiting. Actually, I think I do. Open it. Amy's hand shook slightly as she entered the override codes. Against every piece of common sense I have, I'm trusting you on this. The door hissed open. Kyle stepped through. Behind him, the door sealed shut with a final terrifying click. He was alone with the creature that had defeated 8 champions. The Vex Thor rose immediately, its massive body uncoiling. Muscles rippled under those black scales. 6 legs spread wide, lowering its center of gravity. It was a combat stance. Kyle recognized it immediately. But he didn't move into a fighting position. Instead, he stood still, hands visible at his sides. Not relaxed exactly, he was ready to move if needed. But not aggressive. Not threatening. He was showing confidence without challenge. The creature circled him. What? Its claws clicked on the metal floor. Kyle turned slowly, keeping his eyes on it but not staring directly. Direct staring was a challenge in most predator species. The Vex Thor circled again. Closer this time. Kyle could smell it now, something like hot stone and electricity. He could feel the heat radiating from its body. Then it lunged. Kyle's body reacted before his mind could catch up. Years of training on Terra Nova kicked in. He moved with the attack, not against it. When the creature's massive paw came at him, he redirected it rather than blocking. When it tried to bowl him over, he rolled with the momentum. The Vex Thor was testing him. Every strike was calculated, measuring his responses. And Kyle gave it what it needed to see. He fought back, but only enough to prove he could. He never went for the vulnerable points he'd studied in Amy's scans. Never tried to inflict real damage. Never attempted to dominate. This wasn't about winning. It was about mutual respect. 5 minutes of constant movement. Kyle's muscles burned. Sweat poured down his face. He took hits that would leave bruises for weeks. 10 minutes. His breath came in ragged gasps. Blood from a reopened cut on his arm left spots on the floor. 20 minutes. Both of them were slowing down. Kyle's legs shook. The Vex Thor's breath came in heavy snorts. Finally they both stopped. Human and alien stood 5 feet apart, both breathing hard, both bleeding from minor wounds. A stalemate. Neither victor nor vanquished. Kyle slowly lowered himself to the floor, sitting cross-legged. His muscles screamed in protest. He kept his hands visible, open, unthreatening. And he waited. The Vex Thor watched him. Those golden eyes studied every detail. Time seemed to stop. Kyle could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Then, impossibly, the creature moved closer. 1 step. 2. 3. It lowered its massive body to the floor, those 6 legs folding beneath it. 3 feet away from Kyle. Close enough to kill him in an instant. But it just lay there. Watching. Amy's voice crackled over the speakers, barely containing her excitement. Kyle, I'm reading something incredible. The creature's neural patterns, they're synchronizing with yours. I've never seen anything like this. It's like your brainwaves are finding the same frequency. Kyle smiled through his exhaustion. Not a pet, he said softly. A partner. The Vex Thor's ear plates twitched. Almost like agreement. Then the alarm started screaming throughout the entire station. Red emergency lights flooded the cell. Kyle's moment of peace shattered as Amy's voice came back, now filled with panic. We've got multiple contacts dropping out of FTL. Pirates. Heavy weapons signatures. They're heading straight for us. The alarm shrieked through every corridor of Station Omega-7. Crew members scrambled to their positions as the automated voice kept repeating the same terrifying message. Pirate fleet dropping out of FTL. Multiple hostile signatures detected. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. Kyle was already moving before Amy could even unlock the containment cell door. His feet pounded against the metal floor as he ran through the corridors. Other personnel were running too, but in the opposite direction, away from the containment wing. Standard protocol during an attack was to evacuate non-essential areas. But Kyle knew better. He'd served on 3 frontier stations before this one. He'd seen what pirates did when they came for valuable cargo. They didn't negotiate. They didn't take prisoners unless those prisoners were worth something. And the Vex Thor was worth a fortune on the black market. Commander Lisa Hayes met him at the containment wing entrance. Her sidearm was drawn, her face set in grim determination. Behind her, 2 security officers were setting up defensive positions. Kyle, we need to evacuate this sector, she said quickly. Standard protocol. We seal the bulkheads and fall back to the inner defense ring. No. Kyle's jaw set in that stubborn way that Lisa had learned to recognize over the past few days. This isn't up for debate. Open the cell. Lisa stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Are you insane? If those pirates breach this section, the last thing we need is that creature loose. Kyle grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look him in the eyes. Lisa, listen to me. If the pirates get through, they'll kill everyone here to claim the Vex Thor. But if we give it a choice, if we give it freedom, maybe it'll choose to fight with us instead of being taken. That's the biggest maybe I've ever heard, Lisa said, but her hand was already moving toward the control panel. Trust me. Please. The station shook as the first impacts hit the outer hull. The pirates weren't wasting time with warnings or negotiations. They were going straight for a breach. Lisa's finger hovered over the override button for just a moment. Then she pressed it. The containment field dropped completely. Not just the temporary opening Kyle had used earlier, but everything. All barriers. All restraints. The Vex Thor was completely free for the first time since it had been captured 6 months ago. Every weapon on the station could have targeted it in that moment. Automated turrets. Defense systems. The station's AI could have ended the creature in seconds. But nothing fired. The Vex Thor emerged slowly from its cell, those 6 powerful legs carrying it into the open corridor. Its head swung around, taking in its surroundings. Taking in the armed humans standing there. Could have attacked. Could have run. Could have done anything. Instead, it looked directly at Kyle. Their eyes met. Human and alien. 2 warriors who'd spent days learning to understand each other. Kyle extended his hand slowly, palm up. An offering, not a command. Ready to choose your side? He asked quietly. The creature moved forward. 1 step. 2. Then it lowered its massive head, pressing it gently against Kyle's palm. The world exploded. That's the only way Kyle could describe it. The bond that had been slowly forming between them suddenly ignited like a star-going supernova. Power rushed through his veins. His senses expanded in ways that should have been impossible. He could feel the Vex Thor's strength as if it were his own. Could sense its awareness, its thoughts, its absolute unwavering loyalty. He gasped, nearly falling to his knees from the intensity of it. But the creature was there, supporting him, steadying him. They weren't 2 separate beings anymore. They were something new. Something the galaxy hadn't seen in a very, very long time. The outer doors exploded inward with a deafening blast. Pirates poured through the breach, at least a dozen of them. They were a mixed group, Krellians, Gorath, even a few rogue humans. All of them heavily armed. All of them here for one thing. They expected to find a caged beast and desperate defenders. What they found was something else entirely. Kyle and the Vex Thor moved as one entity. There was no separation between human thought and alien action. Kyle's tactical mind, trained through years of combat experience, flowed directly into the creature's devastating physical capabilities. When Kyle thought about flanking an enemy, the Vex Thor was already moving. When the creature sensed danger from behind, Kyle was already turning. They flowed through the pirates like a force of nature. The Vex Thor's claws found weak points in armor with surgical precision because Kyle knew exactly where to strike. Kyle's combat training kept them from being surrounded because the creature's enhanced senses showed him every enemy position. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. Pirates fell back, their confident assault turning into confused retreat. These were hardened criminals who'd raided dozens of stations. They'd faced security forces, automated defenses, even military units. But they'd never faced anything like this. What is that thing? One pirate screamed before the Vex Thor sent him flying into a wall. More pirates pushed forward. Kyle and his partner met them head-on. A Krellian warrior twice Kyle's size swung a massive energy blade. Kyle ducked under it while the Vex Thor swept the warrior's legs. They moved like dancers, each movement flowing into the next, perfectly synchronized. Then Kyle saw him. The pirate commander stood at the back of the group, directing his forces. He was a massive Krellian, his face covered in scars from 100 battles. But he wasn't looking at his troops. He was staring at Kyle and the Vex Thor with an expression that wasn't fear or anger. It was awe. Impossible, the commander breathed. His troops were falling back, regrouping, but he didn't seem to notice. The old bonds, the ancient pairings, they said those were myths. Stories from dead civilizations. Kyle stepped forward, the Vex Thor moving with him, their bodies casting a single shadow in the emergency lighting. Blood dripped from his knuckles. The creature's scales were splattered with battle. But they stood strong, unbroken. Not myths, Kyle said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Just forgotten by people who saw everything as something to conquer instead of someone to stand beside. The pirate commander looked at his remaining troops, then back at the bonded pair. Whatever he saw in that moment made his decision for him. "Fall back," he ordered. "We're leaving." The pirates retreated, dragging their wounded with them. Within minutes, sensors showed their ships breaking orbit, jumping back into FTL. The station was safe. Kyle's legs finally gave out and he sat down hard on the deck. The Vex Thor curled around him protectively, its warmth seeping into his exhausted body. They'd done it. Together. The Galactic Council chamber was massive, designed to hold representatives from over 100 different species. Kyle had never been inside before. Few humans had. The ceiling stretched up so high it disappeared into shadows, and the walls curved in a way that made sound carry perfectly to every corner. Kyle stood in the center spotlight, feeling very small and very human. Around him, arranged in ascending tiers like an ancient amphitheater, sat the most powerful beings in known space. Military commanders. Planetary leaders. Ancient species that had been traveling the stars since before humans discovered fire. And beside Kyle, lying calm and alert, was the Vex Thor. He'd named him Ash after the color of his scales and certain light. The creature that had terrified the galaxy now rested peacefully next to a human who barely came up to its shoulder. Ambassador Vorin stood first. The tall Elthian looked different now. Less arrogant. More uncertain. The past week had shaken his understanding of how the universe worked. "Explain, human," Vorin said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Our greatest champions failed. Warriors bred for perfection. Enhanced beings with capabilities far beyond baseline biology. Telepaths who could read minds. All of them failed. Yet you, a simple human, succeeded. How?" Kyle took a deep breath. Dozens of alien eyes watched him. Some curious. Some skeptical. Some openly hostile. He could feel Ash's presence beside him through their bond, a steady source of confidence. "Because you all missed the point," Kyle said clearly. "Every single one of you tried to tame Ash. You sent your champions in there to prove they were stronger, faster, better. But you can't tame a warrior. You can only earn a warrior's respect." A Gorath delegate stood up, his rocky body scraping against his seat. The Gorath were warriors themselves, a species that valued combat above all else. "Respect? We showed strength. We sent the finest fighters from a dozen worlds." "No," Kyle said firmly, meeting the delegate's eyes without flinching. "You showed dominance. There's a huge difference. Strength isn't about how hard you can hit or how fast you can move. Real strength is knowing when not to use your power." Ash wasn't looking for the strongest fighter in the galaxy. He was looking for the strongest character. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some species made clicking sounds. Others hummed or chirped their confusion. The concept seemed foreign to them. Dr. Amy Carson stepped forward, her datapad projecting holographic information into the center of the chamber. She'd been working non-stop since the pirate attack, digging through ancient archives. "The Vex Thor species didn't evolve alone," Amy explained, her voice steady despite addressing the most powerful beings in the galaxy. "They evolved alongside an ancient race called the Kindred. We found references to them in archaeological sites across 3 star systems. The Kindred didn't keep pets or weapons. They formed partnerships with the Vex Thor. True partnerships built on mutual respect and trust." The hologram showed ancient carvings. Beings that looked almost humanoid, standing beside creatures that were clearly Vex Thor ancestors. Not master and servant. Partners. Equals. "The Kindred were one of the most advanced civilizations in galactic history," Amy continued. "But they died out. Went extinct. And we found evidence of why. They forgot the truth their ancestors knew. They started seeing their bonded partners as tools. As weapons to be controlled. The bonds broke. And without those partnerships, their civilization collapsed." Kyle picked up where she left off. "Humans never forgot that truth because we learned it the hard way over thousands of years. We evolved alongside wolves and those wolves became dogs. We lived near big cats, bears, eagles, predators that could kill us easily. But instead of trying to dominate them, we learned to understand them. To respect them." He placed his hand on Ash's head. The creature leaned into his touch, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. "We made predators into family," Kyle said. "Not through force or control but through trust and loyalty. That's just how we are. It's in our nature. When we see another creature we don't automatically ask, 'How can I control this?' We ask, 'Can we be friends?'" Commander Morrison stepped forward, his uniform crisp, his bearing military perfect. "The human colony worlds are full of species that other races fear. We have wolves in our homes. We ride horses that could break our bones with one kick. We train raptors that could tear us apart. We live alongside predators and we make them part of our families. Not through domination but through understanding. The chamber fell into silence. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the entire galaxy was holding its breath. Finally, the head counselor stood. She was ancient even by galactic standards, a being whose species had been exploring space for 10,000 years. What you're describing, human. This capacity for bonding across species. This is a strategic advantage we never considered. Kyle shook his head. It's not a strategy, counselor. It's not something we do because it gives us an advantage. It's just how we are. We don't see other species as above us or below us. We see them as potential friends, partners, family. He looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as he could. This isn't about humans being better than anyone else. We're not. We're smaller than most of you. Weaker than most of you. We can't read minds or phase through walls or regenerate from injuries. But we're different in one way. We spent millennia learning to walk beside nature instead of trying to conquer it. Commander Lisa Hayes moved to stand with Kyle and Morrison. The Galactic Defense Force would like to formally request the establishment of a new division. We're calling it the Companion Corps. The specialty would be human-alien bonding and partnership units. The vote came quickly. Species after species raised their approval. Some did it eagerly, already seeing the possibilities. Others did it reluctantly, still struggling with the concept. But the result was unanimous. The Companion Corps was approved. 3 months later, Kyle walked through Station Omega-7 with Ash at his side. Everything had changed. People no longer avoided the corridors where they walked. Instead, they stopped to talk, to ask questions, to reach out tentatively toward Ash, who accepted their touch with patient dignity. In the new training wing, dozens of other humans worked with alien species that had been considered too dangerous, too wild, too impossible. A young woman named Beth laughed as a 6-legged creature from a frozen moon climbed onto her shoulders. A man named Derek mediated between 2 competing hatchlings, teaching them to work together instead of fighting. Kyle watched with quiet pride. The galaxy was learning. Slowly, carefully, but learning. Ash rumbled beside him, a sound of contentment. Ready for the next mission, partner? Kyle asked. The response came not in words but in feeling. Through their bond, Kyle felt absolute loyalty. Fierce joy. Unshakable trust. The kind of bond that couldn't be forced or controlled. Only earned. The galaxy had spent 10,000 years trying to dominate nature. Humanity had simply learned to walk beside it. And that made all the difference.